On Sunday the 8th of March 2020, under the light of a full moon, 20-plus people gathered for what had been advertised as a bewitching group walk around the lunar-charged waterways of Sturchley and Lifford. This was the inaugural event of the Walkspace Collective, founded by myself and two others in order to promote and proliferate the practice of non-normal walking in the West Midlands. Night vision kicked in as we navigated the woodland paths, lakeside vistas and snaking canals, all under the watchful gaze of the Crow Moon, celestial beacon heralding the end of winter. At the canal junction, we used the moon water to cast a spell, dousing the towpath to mark the boundaries and walking in silence to seal the magic, each participant setting a private intention to be fulfilled by the coming of the next full moon. And so Walkspace was born, and we retired to the pub buoyed by the impressive turnout, the evident hunger for this sort of thing, buzzing from the connections forged, the conversations had, and the seemingly endless possibilities that lay ahead. The number of coronavirus cases in the UK at this time was approaching 300, and deaths were still in the single figures. While there was a vague awareness of the threat this thing posed, it still felt distant enough to seem like a problem that was happening somewhere else. For a while, we were able to look forward to the year that lay ahead and the adventures it had in store. A pilgrimage to Milton Keynes for the summer solstice, a commemorative walk for the anniversary of the Kinder Scout mass trespass, and maybe, just maybe, a day trip to Coventry. We had tapped into the power of collective walking, and the world was our oyster. But then...
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
When the government finally announced lockdown on March the 23rd, the number of infections had hit 3,000 and would rocket to 20,000 by the end of the month, with close to 400 deaths a day and rising. Just like that, we had entered a new, much smaller world, and those dreams of going to Coventry and Milton Keynes now seemed impossibly frivolous. Walking became a purely solitary activity, limited to 1 hour a day as per government guidelines. After the initial shock and trauma had subsided, I actually found I took quite well to this gentler pace of life. With the sudden lifting of all responsibilities and demands, I was master of my own time in a way I'd never known before and possibly never would again. I could happily just sit in the garden or stare out the window and not feel guilty or bored. I was sleeping better than I had done in months and started keeping a dream journal. On a walk, I overheard someone talking on the phone about how they felt a dramatic increase in well-being since they stopped commuting, how they were getting back in touch with old friends and finally had the time to read that pile of books. My daily state-sanctioned strolls became my lifeline. If anything, being limited to 1 hour just made me appreciate that time even more. I became more attentive and alert, determined to make every second count. I may have been restricted to my own neighbourhood, but you don't have to go far to find wonders. As Phil Smith observed, every street you walk down is a treasure trove of geology and materials. Each window is a museum of symbols. Every tree is a drama of buds in kissings, wounds and blossoming. For once, many of us have the time to teach ourselves about these things. I started learning to identify the trees and birds. I'd try walking at unusual times of day, at sunrise, at dusk when the bats come out, or in the middle of the night. I made the most of the reduced traffic by walking in the middle of the road. I befriended a group of trees in the park and made an effort to visit regularly. Considering that this was supposed to be the apocalypse, I actually found I was having a pretty good time, as if this was some sort of global experiment to see how we might take to a less ruinous way of life. I sometimes wondered if I should feel guilty for this, when I knew people who were still at work, exhausted, in danger, on the front line or in other key sectors, or else were shielding due to medical conditions and didn't even know when they'd next be able to leave the house. But then I'd see a squirrel and forget all about it. Walking the same streets over and over, certain details and features started to jump out at me, things I hadn't paid attention to before, like the rogue poplar tree bursting through the pavement, the curtain of bindweed concealing a vacant plot of land, and the Top Cat figurine on a satellite dish above TopSat Digital. These things became fixtures of my walks, comforting presence in uncertain times. The other members of the Walkspace Collective had been having similar experiences of extreme noticing on their walks, and as we all lived in the same area, we decided to start mapping our discoveries, and invited others to do so too. We began to amass a vast database of local curios, and thought of ways we might put it to use for future walking exploits. On the night of each full moon, I'd go out to walk, alone. I'd find a body of water, and in the presence of bats, geese and foxes, I would attempt to renew the magic for another lunar cycle. Keeping up this tradition connected me back to that first full moon walk in March, my last real memory of the before time, of a kind of togetherness now unthinkable. It also connected me forward to an imagined re-emergence, for I knew that one day the moon would rise on a post-COVID world in which such gatherings would be possible once more. As the social calendar fell away, I found myself becoming more attuned to natural cycles to mark the passing of time. Gone were the work routines, the weekend rituals, the Digbeth First Fridays and the Sunday Expresses. Gone were the flat pack and supersonic festivals, and in their place was the flower moon, the strawberry moon, the equinox and the solstice, and the daily revelation of the changing seasons. The overwhelming abundance of spring, the anticipation of cherry blossom and bluebells, the discovery of wild raspberries and strawberries, and the bramble blossom betokening a bumper blackberry crop later in the year. I discovered that tree identification became much easier as the year went on, with the appearance of some telltale signs. And summer turned out to be just as colourful as spring. I remember the thrill of spotting the first flowering buddleia, its intoxicating scent evoking the longed-for playgrounds of rubble hills, waste grounds and industrial ruins. Every first Sunday of the month, the Loiterers' Resistance Movement would arrange a synchronised walk based around a certain theme or instruction that people could join in remotely from anywhere in the country. In May, we were told to look for islands. While I valued these opportunities to walk together while alone, in a way they couldn't help but emphasise the very isolation they were designed to overcome. Mediated togetherness is no substitute for the real thing. As the moons passed, I came to yearn for genuine interaction and proximity, for conversations and crowds. While in some ways I had benefited from the enforced solitude of lockdown, with each moon I felt more keenly what was missing. Then one day I found that the rogue poplar had been mercilessly hacked back to a stump, seemingly in imitation of the sorely diminished world we were now living in. On the 13th of May, the first easing of lockdown measures came into effect, allowing us to meet outside with just one other person from another household. Whereas socialising pre-COVID tended to involve meeting for someone for a coffee or a beer, the only real option now was to meet someone for a walk, which, it turned out, suited me just fine. Having walked in isolation for so long, I found that walking with another person broke me out of my lockdown-forged habits, introducing unexpected detours and bringing fresh perspectives to the well-trodden terrain. On these one-on-one walks, I learnt that dragonflies are terrifying, but geese are fine. I learnt that the pigeons you see in parks and the pigeons you see in the street are two different types of pigeon. I learnt how to extract sap from a birch tree for a refreshing beverage. I learnt that there are parakeets in the local woods and how to identify their call. I was also introduced to the theory that parakeets are the outlaws of the bird kingdom, and that all pet birds secretly yearn to break free and join them, like a misunderstood child might wish to run away and join the circus. I learnt to identify edible mushrooms that taste just like chicken. I learnt about this terrifying science fiction plant that colonises riverbanks and can hospitalise you with third-degree burns. By ever so gradually coming out of isolation, I felt like I was rediscovering what it is that makes walking with others so special in the first place. After just a few simple one-on-one walks, my South Birmingham suburb had become re-enchanted once more, with whole new unexpected layers of ecological intrigue. Towards the end of one walk, we stopped beside the culvert that takes the River Ray beneath the railway, and my walking partner for that day spontaneously suggested we walk through and see where we end up. I thought, yeah, great, let's come back with wellies sometime. But before I knew it, she had hopped across the stepping stones and was approaching the mouth of the tunnel, gesturing as if to say, "What? Not afraid of getting your feet wet, are you?" A new threshold had been crossed, and further adventures beckoned. With June came further easing of lockdown restrictions, allowing outdoor gatherings of up to 6 people. For the first time, the Walkspace team was able to meet up unmediated, and we celebrated with a summer solstice walk, visiting various points from the map, including the Rogue Poplar, the Bindweed Curtain, the Funhouse Mirador, the Kissing Cherry Trees, and the experimental Caged Garden. We finished up in the allotments overlooking the Ray Valley, and as the sun went down, we raised a toast to midsummer. It wasn't Milton Keynes, but it was the most human interaction any of us had had in months, and by visiting and celebrating the landmarks together, the map had transcended its digital origins and begun to realise its potential as a catalyst for real-world gatherings and explorations. The UK recorded its lowest number of new coronavirus cases since the start of lockdown, and for the first time it seemed like there might be a glimmer of light at the end of the admittedly still very long tunnel. An unforeseen result of my one-on-one walks was that I now had a small group of people who were up for exploring at a deeper level than the casual stroll. Taking advantage of the lifted restrictions, we arranged an expedition to Cannon Hill Park to see if we could access the sunken riverside path beside the Mac. Once again, I was happy to have my cautious inclinations vetoed by the eagerness of others. Oh look, a terrifying spiky fence. No problem.
It's not weed that they've introduced the bug for, and then the other one they're talking about introducing the bug.
On reaching the end of the path, we climbed back to street level and ventured into Balsall Heath to see if we could access the culvert further along. We came to a tight bend in the road and determined that the river must be on the other side of the fence. We lingered a while to see if we could make anything out, and just as we were about to move on, one of the party noticed some fading graffiti written in French and was able to translate it as "the poetry is in the street." Clearly it was a sign, and as we stood trying to discern the origin of this phrase, we were hailed by a couple of construction workers renovating the adjacent property. My first instinct was that they must think we looked suspicious and want us to move on, but as I began to shuffle uncomfortably, one of them said, "You know, you could get a much better view from up here."
Are you going to do it? Even if we break our legs.
No, I just. Thank you so much.
And just when we thought it was over, they said, If it's the river you're interested in, you know we've got a ladder, right?
I think you're scared. Of course I'm scared. Tell everybody that.
That's so eerie.
In the side of the man-made gorge was a man-made cave, and on the ceiling we found a huddle of old lady moths, with estimates of the number ranging from 26 to 150. When we re-emerged at street level, we walked for a moment in silence as we reoriented ourselves. Rue summed up that strange sense of dislocation upon returning to the world by saying that it now felt like the river had been the real level and that the streets were raised on platforms.